Hi, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're tackling the whole SaaS apocalypse narrative, and we're trying to come at this as realist. We're bullish on AI, and we hear a lot of people talking that AI is going to obliterate SaaS and it's going to eliminate the need for SaaS and it's going to just take over everything that we do. And I don't think that's quite the case here, but there is a huge shift going on and a huge change coming for SaaS leaders, for SaaS organizations. So the interesting question is not whether AI will change SaaS, but how does it do it? What's going to change? Where does the values shift? What gets weaker? What gets stronger? And what do SaaS leaders need to be thinking about now as they're looking at not only how to embrace AI within their own organizations, but what it means for the future of their products and future of their organization and their customer base. So there's a lot of things that are going on with pricing, with the features, with product strategy, and really just an existential challenge all the way through. So in some cases, it's all of these things.
Welcome to Breakthrough SaaS Growth with the Jasons, the podcast where we cut through the noise and share strategies that actually drive customer-led growth. Each week, we bring you straight-talking conversations on adoption, retention, expansion, all things AI, and everything in between. Let's get started.
So let's get started. Sort of the case for the prosecution. Jason, why do people think AI will kill SaaS?
I think one of the really big things is, firstly, building software is getting fundamentally easier. I read something only today that was saying in a couple of years' time, it's anyone can build. So the need of a development team and engineering team is going to shift. What people call vibe coding today has lowered that barrier to entry for creating internal tools, workflows, and lightweight apps.
Yep.
And I think that genuinely weakens a lot of the old logic behind build once, sell forever.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely a big shift there. And I think there's coming expectations as well, too, that with vibe coding and with everything, that products will move so much faster, too.
The other thing we're seeing is AI is also attacking the per seat model. If one agent can do work that previously needed 5 people clicking around in 5 tools, then a lot of seat-based pricing that we've had for years now starts to wobble.
Right.
And wobble quite significantly. And that's not just a feature issue. This becomes now a commercial issue.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be really brutal for a lot of folks. How do you grow when historically it's been, more people, more bodies, and a lot of the SaaS, kind of like I think this is a holdover from traditional on-prem days where it was we sold you the seat, what you do with it is up to you and where it goes, and that's really going out the window now. And so, if we're going to have fewer people needing to access your SaaS application, but you still need to get the same amount of revenue or more, what does that look like? How does that change the math?
I think you're right there. The third thing I'd say about the kind of the change here is that it's some of the loudest people building this future as we see it today are openly saying that traditional gaps get displaced. So when that narrative comes from inside the people building the replacement, it lands with a little bit more force. And I think we've got to pay a bit more attention to this change that's going on.
Oh, definitely. And, I think, to be honest, I think some SaaS companies and some applications are going to be really vulnerable here. If the business case for them before was wobbly and the value wasn't clear, suddenly people are going to be asking themselves, hey, do we need this? Have we overbuilt this? What's the purpose of this? And I think sort of related to that, I've seen a lot of SaaS application that just has tons and tons of features. It was almost like a developer had an orgy, just like went crazy here. And I think people really need to say, do we need all this? And will people be buying all this from us? Or will they want to be doing more of this in-house? So I think there's some real shifts coming up.
I think there are. And I think, there are some really big changes and shifts, as you said, coming on. But I don't think SaaS isn't going to disappear.
No.
And I think one of the fundamental arguments where SaaS is dying, one of the fundamental arguments where it falls down is that businesses still need that system of record. They still need permissions, they still need governance, they still need compliance, auditability, repeatable workflows, board level reporting, and cross-functional accountability. All of those things are still there and are not going anywhere. And AI right now is not going to replace any of those. And I think we've got to be very, very, very cognizant of that fact.
Oh, I agree. I think that's so important. You still need that reliable, trusted, the data is accurate. And I think right now everyone's like, AI can hallucinate, AI can make shit up, AI can do what it's going to do. And you can't necessarily trust it for everything. And as I like to think of it, with a lot of traditional SaaS systems, you knew what was going to happen. It was predictable. Is if then logic. If this happens, this will be the result. If this data is entered, this will trigger off an automation, and here's what that automation looks like. And I think with AI, it's a bit more black box, and you're like, I don't know what's going to be. And if I coded it one way and you coded it differently or prompted it, it would look very different. So I think there's a lot of areas there where AI is going to orchestrate things, AI is going to make stuff up, and AI can add a lot of value. But there's always that need for AI handles ambiguity better than a logic driven system. But you need both.
I think we're going to see this as well, especially true in environments and organizations that are high risk, that are highly regulated. If numbers are being presented externally, if a forecast is going to a board, if a compliance workflow has legal consequences, if a renewal commitment affects revenue visibility, people, leaders still want deterministic controls around that process. And I think that's absolutely fundamental.
Yep. And who knows, that may change over time, but I think that is a crucial distinction is, where is it that speed and pattern recognition matter? Where is it that interpretation matters? So, when I think of things like chatbots and people coming over the web, like, oh, here's how an individual customer describes their need or their issue. That's very different than capturing like, oh, here's the financial items we agreed to in the contract and making sure the invoice is correct and that the payment is right and that we're not leaving things on the table. So I think there is a lot there. And I think it does mean that, SaaS doesn't disappear, and that you're going to need both.
I think it does. It changes the role about what the technology is doing. It's less about the shiny interface and more about being the trusted operating backbone beneath that action. I think that's really fundamental. That user interface and how we interact with it goes away.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree completely with it goes away, but I think it is going to change because when I look at it right now, I also think, the UIs for a lot of organizations, they've done a lot of work to make it easy and people think, oh, it's so simple to navigate and to understand. And there has been a lot of work with that, but it does guide you through a certain pattern of work. And I think with AI, AI operating on its own doesn't need an interface at all, which is
Yeah.
important. But when I look at the other side, I've seen a lot of folks go to ChatGPT or Claude, and they're like, it's a big open screen. It's kind of like having writer's block when you have that blank page in front of you, and they don't necessarily know where to start or where to go. And some people who love AI and who live their lives in it all the time, they're excited about this to a degree. But when you get some folks who are less comfortable with tech and other issues, they may say, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to go. So I think it is sort of a double-edged sword. And that might be one of those areas where people are like, oh, AI is going to kill everything. But I think people do want a bit of guidance in there. And even looking at some of the new applications people are building layered on top of AI, they're adding in their own knowledge bases and their own things, but they're also putting in UI elements to make it look distinct and make it easier for people to go through.
Really interesting thing with that. I mean, you said there that AI could be talking to AI, in which
Mhm.
case the UI becomes completely redundant.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
what the way of thinking here, and even those examples you gave, change where we need our product teams to focus. If the way that you are positioning your product is about that usability, ease of use, it's mostly interface, you rightly should be nervous. If
Mhm.
your moat is more around process depth, trust, embedded workflow, and data equity, integrity even, you're in a much, much, much stronger place. So I think there are some really different themes coming out here.
Absolutely. And on top of all that too, those are the shiny things that people see. But I think the other question still comes back to value creation. And at the end of the day, not all AI tools add a tremendous value or enough value to generate the cost to justify the cost that they have. But a lot of SaaS tools, they look pretty, but are they generating value? So I think the debate's going to really keep coming back there as well too. So I'd like to know, sort of like not all SaaS is equal too. Some are very, very different. So what do you think about that? How will it impact different SaaS organizations differently?
It's a really good question, this. And I think that there are going to be some workflows. If you look at a lot of technology in SaaS is about workflow automation, workflow improving. And I think there are some workflows that will absolutely get enhanced and improved with AI. Some will get cheaper. There will
Hmm.
some that will need to be rebuilt around AI. And there are going to be some of those workflows that are absolutely, I'm going to say the word, going to be cannibalized. They're going to completely
Yeah.
destroyed and might not even be what they originally were. So I think this is something really big that we're going to see, is a change in how these underlying business processes and workflows will operate. AI is going to impact this.
Yeah, definitely. I think you've hit on a really good point there because, when people talk about the SaaS apocalypse, it's not going to hit everyone equally. And if you're a SaaS vendor, I think you need to do some really serious analysis around how will AI impact my customer base and my user base? Will they still need me? Will I still be relevant? Because some absolutely will, and some really won't. And then you need to really think through, where do you pivot and what do you do? And what does that look
I think that's again really really critical. A
like?
thin workflow product, for example, with weak differentiation is in a substantially different position today than a
Yeah.
product that's deeply embedded in an enterprise. It's a deeply embedded enterprise platform with governance, history, approval, and multiple teams depending on it. So I think that usage within an organization is fundamental as well. If you've got one or two teams that have bought something in, there's a massive risk around that. If it's something that's fundamental to how the organization works and creates its value for its customers, that's going to be a lot harder for AI to have an impact on that.
Yeah. I like what you're saying there. And I think of like Salesforce or HubSpot or any of the CRMs where they're used by a large group of people. They have a lot of functionality. Many of them are very embedded in processes today. AI is not going to change that all overnight, but it's going to start to chip away and chip away. And I think those vendors that are looking there, they also need to say what part of my value, my product stack adds value and uh, won't be taken away by AI, or maybe even the other ways, which part of it powers AI and which part of it becomes even more valuable, and start to look at that as well too, because it is going to change all the stuff up.
I think
Um,
you almost there get to the question of which part of your product is genuine infrastructure. Is it which part of your product is fundamental for a customer's business? What part is basically admin convenience or even a nice wrapper around work that AI can now absorb? And I think those differences are critical. How important is your platform, your tool, your service to a customer? And how much almost do customers not differentiate it from themselves? This is how I work. I wouldn't think of this as something separate from me, for my company.
yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. I take it like dashboards. A lot of CRM systems right now, they have their built-out dashboards, and you can share them, you can distribute them. Everyone looks at that, and everyone, they're all based off the same underlying data. So everyone's going to have the same basis for analysis and for communication. I was speaking with a guy the other day who's in RevOps, and he went through using AI and pulled out custom information, pulling from multiple systems, and created a new dashboard that he had access to that was really enlightening. It showed a lot of information that they couldn't get anywhere else. And he said, we've been trying to get this information built out for 4 years. The AI has just now gotten to the point that it could do it. And it took him about, a couple hours to get it built. But then he showed it to his boss, then he showed it to the CEO, and they were gobsmacked. But there are so many people in their organization that don't have access to it, or that so many people in the organization are going to build their own dashboard. So everyone's going to have a different vision of what the truth looks like, and what that means. So I think there's also a real risk here that, for your organization, what does this mean for us? How do we make sure people are having access to the same information and looking at it through the same lens? And AI may help with that lens, but it's going to change things quite a bit. So definitely one of those infrastructure type questions, and where it goes.
I think what we're seeing, AI right now is almost eating shallow admin first. It's eating
Yeah.
those thin layers first. And that's where people are seeing a lot of the advantage. It makes me, and we've talked about it on other episodes where we can help in customer success. It takes away those admin functions that are taking my time. But what it's not doing automatically is consuming those systems that hold accountability,
Yeah.
governance, and a shared operational truth. Before we get back to the episode, a quick word from our sponsor, me, Jason Noble. Too many companies focus on winning customers and not enough on keeping and growing them. I help founders and revenue leaders improve retention, unlock expansion, and build stronger post-sales strategies so growth does not stop when the contract's signed. If that sounds familiar and you want sharper thinking and practical help, connect with me on LinkedIn or head over to breakthroughsaasgrowth.com. Now, back to the episode. This gets really interesting when you look at different areas of the business and different areas of technology. I think if you look at CRM, you can already see both sides of this argument very, very clearly.
Yeah.
There are absolutely CRM features that AI can eliminate or can make far less valuable. Manual note taking, activity logging, things we've talked about before, that basic enrichment, basic lead scoring. And if you look at customer success, basic health scores, simple routing, first pipeline inspection, a lot of the admin heavy, tell me what happened and give me some basic insight. So that's already happening today.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. And so much of what we were talking about was the painful crap that everyone hated anyway. Like trying to get sales folks to put meeting notes in and add real information. They hated it, and they're just like, it's not great. And managers tolerated it. They said, okay, well, I can see the core information there, but they weren't getting rich information that they could really use. It's really sort of held together by indifference and caffeine. It's sort of like, what are we doing here?
Yep.
So it is going to change a lot of those attitudes, I think, or behaviors, because the easy stuff is gone now.
It is completely. And I think AI technology is a lot better suited to a lot of those jobs than humans are. But that doesn't mean that CRM as a function, as a tool, as a segment, as a way of working disappears, does it?
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps then CRM will start to live up to, the hype that it had promised it for 20 years now, which was always, we'll have this 360-degree view of our customers, we'll have all this information, we'll know everything. And yet it was falling down because the data to populate that information wasn't there.
Yeah.
And now AI can comb through meeting notes or can look over emails and documents, extract the right information, and then update the CRM for the rep. So I think there's some real opportunities there, but then there's still going to be some accountability that has to happen with the rep, and that doesn't go away.
Completely. The relationship history, deal structure, approvals, commitments and forecasts, the handovers, renewal timing, all of these things, absolutely. I think if you've got 6 stakeholders in a buying committee, multiple internal teams, and a live commercial process, you need a trusted, shared system, not vibes.
Yeah, very, very true. Now, part of that's also going to be some data capture issues. So AI is great for those things where, like, you're doing a Zoom meeting and people are all online and it can just record it. It's going to be a little bit different in in-person meetings unless people start to have some way to incorporate their AI into those as well too, and do it consistently. Otherwise, it's going to start to break down quite a bit too. But I think that comes back to AI can help you navigate the process, but it's not going to let you skip it. And it doesn't say you need to have a defined process that everyone can understand, because it's sort of for your humans to collaborate effectively with AI, it's got to be in a consistent, structured way. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of folks.
Completely. It definitely doesn't remove the need for that cross-functional trust in that process. Sales, finance, leadership, customer success, the organizations still need that shared view of what's going on. I think this next area now is where my view, I think our view, Jason, probably gets a little bit stronger. A lot of people look at AI and think the main issue today is capability, but it isn't. The main issue is still around, as with a lot of technology, it's around adoption. It's around process design. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think you're 100% correct. I mean, that's been the issue with CRM for years and years. It's the functionality is there and it works. And I've had many clients bring me in where they said, we went live with our CRM 2 years ago. People still aren't using it. We're still not getting the outcome. We're still not getting the value. And the other big thing, we still haven't solved our underlying business problem. AI, it's not a magic wand. This isn't Harry Potter time. It's another tool that can do other capabilities, but it also still requires human intervention to execute the business process and get it done.
I think it is. You're right. Companies bought the system. The leadership team told companies they were going to use it. No one redesigned the way the business worked, the workflow. Nobody fixed the incentives. Nobody built trust within that data. So adoption, as usual, is
Yeah,
patchy. The system underperformed, and we've got a lot of the same challenges that we've always had, just looking slightly differently.
I agree 100%. And sort of related to that too is also how people use the underlying systems. Like, are people entering information in your CRM? Is the process flow designed correctly? Are people being held accountable for doing it? That's creating the data and the data quality that the AI needs to go and do its execution as well too. So if you have flaws in that fundamental process execution and process design work, your AI is going to be limited in its ability to add value. It'll still do some work, but it also could lead you down the wrong path very quickly if the right information isn't there. So I think we have a lot of the same challenges. It's just in a different shape as well too.
You're completely right, and I think with CRM, people had to do extra work before they got value.
Yeah.
With assistive AI, if you want, the immediate value for individuals is more obvious. You get a draft faster, you get a summary faster, better research faster. So in that sense, that element of AI is easier to adopt.
Yeah, but and it's easier at the individual level. Because this is one of the things I also look at when you look at across enterprise systems. There's sort of three levels of value creation. Where does it start at the individual level? But then with the team, are they following the process consistently? Are they working well? Are they using the full capabilities? And then at that whole organizational level, and it really does build up. So it's easy at the individual level, or easier, but it gets really messy once you start to get to that team level and beyond.
Completely. It can get very, very, very messy. Like a lot of technology, everybody uses AI differently. Everyone prompts differently. Everyone has different levels of trust with it. Do I trust that data?
Yeah.
Everyone checks it differently related to that. So you get inconsistency all over the place, which can be a really, really critical problem when you're then relying on that data.
Yeah, and that creates that illusion of transformation. It can be great, and we can tell ourselves we're doing wonderful stuff. But when you look at the bottom line metrics, the revenue, the operating cost, the speed to execute, is it really coming through? So maybe we're getting transformation, maybe we're not.
Absolutely. And I think you see a few people get really, really solid results. The business buys more licenses. Everyone tells themselves they've transformed, but the actual underlying operating model is still inconsistent, still with some challenges.
Yeah, I agree with that. And you could take two businesses, give them the exact same system, configured the exact same way, just have different humans and different team members and different leadership in there. You're going to get a very different result because it really does come from those pieces there. And looking at, like we talked about, inconsistent usage across a revenue team, that creates a different kind of risk. And some people doing it well, other people not. People have individual strengths. So the goal is not to create human cyborgs and clones that everyone follows everything, use the same language and wording, but you want a consistent process adoption going through to have some sort of scalability. So it's getting that right balance of where it needs to be. Because you'll get different uneven quality and uneven levels of trust all the way through. And what I'm seeing too is a lot of people don't know how to lead people through using even traditional enterprise systems. Throw in how to get them to adopt and execute a process using AI as well too. That's going to be a next level challenge as well too. So I think there's a lot in there. And that really takes us to the next issue, which is, with agentic AI, it takes things a bit further. And because the issue is no longer will people use the tool, and it becomes will people trust the agent to do the work, and will we relinquish our hands-on control to an AI agent? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really fascinating challenge and it really dilemma that's coming up because and even I see myself doing it. What level of control are you going to let an agent have over your own data, your own personal data?
Yeah,
Everyone's got I think, a boundary at which they'd say, I'm not going to give it that much access. And it presents a very different psychological and for businesses an operational problem. With CRM, people ask people to feed a system. CRM asks people to feed the system with data.
yeah,
Assistive AI asks people to work alongside the tool. When you look at agentic AI, it asks people to stop doing something and let the machine do it for them instead. It's a massive, massive change. And some people will not and are not comfortable with that right now. Will that come over time? I think absolutely it will.
yeah.
Years ago, with early technology, were people uncomfortable with that early adoption? Yes, absolutely. But it's a real problem right now.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the idea that people will just magically work with agents effectively, that sounds easier in theory than I think it's going to be in practice.
I think completely. And then in practice, it poses even bigger questions. Who owns the mistake when an agent gets it wrong?
Yeah.
Is that IT? Is it development? Is it the person doing it? Is it a third party if the agent's a third party? Where and when does the human review start and when does it stop? What decisions can a business agent make on its own? What decisions does the business have to make? And what process is it actually running underneath the surface? All of these things you've got to start thinking about. You can't just say, yes, I'm going to move to agentic.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was listening to you as well too, who owns it when things go wrong? I think
Yep.
of all the organizations I've been in, either where I've been a team member or there's a consultant. At some point, people start to bitch. People start to complain. So and so didn't do it, or this team didn't do it, or that team didn't do it, and I can't do my job because of them. And they sort of complain up, but they go to their manager usually to address those issues. It's not clear in this organization what influence or authority or responsibility the individual team manager will have over the agentic agents operating within their teams, or what that will look like. And it's harder for people to point the finger at where things went wrong. Where I think when it's one of their coworkers, their very personalities get in the way, and that can be its own problem. You don't have that as much with it. It's hard to offend an AI agent, but you're still going to have those dynamics in there about how the work of others impacts the work of the individual within their team, and how to address those challenges. And it also comes back to, like we've talked about, if that underlying process is poor, the agent can run it perfectly, and it can do it at scale, and it can do it consistently all the way through. But you're going to have issues there, and it's going to expose a poor process rather than solve it. Whereas some humans can work around a bad process.
Exactly. And I think that's the big risk. Not that people refuse to use it, but then organizations are going to deploy it into immature processes and mistake automation for control. And that's a really big challenge.
Yeah, and even just listening to the word automation, I think of a lot of people think of automation today, like we said, if then logic and where it needs to go. And in many ways, AI is an automation tool. It's not necessarily thinking; it's going by the probabilities and by the numbers and kind of thing. So I think people assume that AI is going to act more like a human and less like an automation tool, and that just makes it a little bit harder to trust all the way through. But when I think of all this together, these are going to be some really big leadership problems for SaaS leaders. Looking at not just the product and the market, but the psychology of getting people to use their products alongside of AI and how they help their customers. And I look at a lot of customer success teams right now, and one of the fundamental issues they still have, even just with traditional SaaS, is getting people to use their product and use it effectively and consistently and execute against their process and their organization to get that value. Now you're trying to get them to use their product along with AI and getting those in sync. It's going to be a very big challenge for the SaaS company, for the leadership teams, and for the people implementing the SaaS internally as well too.
So the big question is what survives this reset?
Yeah,
If we're looking at a big change here, what's going to survive? I think products with real systems of record value, products with governance, products with embedded workflow, products with proprietary context or trusted data.
yeah,
Those products are then hard to rip out because they sit inside of how work actually gets done in an organization. So it's not just this brand new shiny tool on top. It's
yeah.
something that's delivering real value, and that's the real thing we've got to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And then, so the obvious other side of that is, so what's going to get squeezed during all this? And I think tools like within workflows and some of those that have really, seat heavy per user licenses, but have weak differentiation. If you can easily be replaced by five other SaaS companies, their SaaS products, and by AI, you're going to be at risk. You need to really look at that. And I think, anything built around manual admin that AI can absorb. So we mentioned like meeting notes and all those, like, Gong and the other tools right now that record everything and analyze and prep you, those are doing a great service all the way through. So something that, if AI can make your task a little bit easier, it's going to chip away at how much they're going to need your SaaS product.
It's so true. And I think what we're looking at then, if we go back to this, is SaaS dying, is AI killing off SaaS. This isn't really about SaaS dying. It's more about the quality of what it's doing
Oh yeah.
and what we need AI to do instead. So it's a very different story. It's more around quality.
Yeah, and that's coming back to the leadership quality story and clarity is how can you explain to someone what your product does and why it's valuable and deserves to exist in an AI world? If you can't make the case for why AI alone can't do what your product does, and why your product is essential to the outcome of your organization, you're going to be in real trouble. And I think you need to start to ask yourself that question: what's the story we make, and how do we convince someone that is AI forward and says, why would I pay you when I can have this myself and be able to tweak it as I need to and customize it exactly for my needs without the limitations of your software functionality. And also, I don't want to be constricted by your development cycles and your development priorities. Why wouldn't I just do this myself?
I think that's the key thing, and that's exactly it. This quality bar is going up, which is great. I think it's probably something that we've needed for a long time, and frankly, it's probably something that's really really healthy.
Absolutely. So let me ask you this, Jason. We're coming to the close of our episode here. Let's boil this down. Where do we land?
I think when we've talked about this before and our conversation here, I think where we land is that AI doesn't kill SaaS as a category, but it resets it. It resets SaaS by shifting value away from basic interface, manual workflow, and seat heavy convenience. And it raises the bar to what really deserves to exist from technology. And it rewards companies that own process, that own trust,
Yeah.
accountability, and real workflow depth that makes a difference to business and to customers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And sort of as we talked about too, it's not necessarily is all of SaaS dead. I mean, some companies will be, but which parts of our product can we really not defend in an AI world? And which parts are living on borrowed time? And I think some SaaS companies may have to recognize there is an overhead to maintaining functionality that isn't necessarily there or that adds complexity that isn't needed in the AI world. And they may need to start to plan for what part of our products do we no longer want to support and that we're going to sunset so that we can focus on what's absolutely critical and what we can build that AI can't do that people will buy in the future.
I think that's the real conversation, isn't it? It's not panic, it's not denial. It's just a clear look at where value is moving and whether your business is moving with it.
Absolutely. And if you're seeing this play out in your category, that's probably the question worth asking now is what's the market before you? What does this look like in the next few years? And what needs to change and pivot?
Absolutely. And I think great episode, great conversation. As always, we like to give you, our listeners, our breakthrough challenge question. And the big one today is this: if AI stripped away all the manual admin, that interface polish and seat-based convenience in your product tomorrow, what would still be left that your customers could not easily replace or would not want to easily replace? So have a think about that. Thanks for listening. Great conversation.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for listening to Breakthrough SaaS Growth with the Jasons. If you enjoyed the episode, follow our show and please share it with someone else in SaaS. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, YouTube, or at breakthroughsaasgrowth.com. And if you know a brilliant guest or a sponsor who'd be a strong fit for the audience, send them our way. Until next time, keep closing the gap between what gets sold and what customers actually achieve.